module, we're going to be looking at the theory of change that we have developed for the case study, and actually identifying what comprises of an indicator, as well as the key elements you should have while devising an indicator grid or framework. So I'd like to begin with the definition of indicators, that it is a variable, its value changes, it measures something, so it's an objective calculation of value, and it looks at key processes, or rather key elements of a program, whether it's inputs, processes, outputs, outcomes. And like when we have looked at a theory of change, for each outcome we need to have an indicator which measures the value change and the achievement of that particular outcome. To begin with, I'd like to also point out that an indicator should be looked at in terms of 4 key parts. One is there should be a specific mention of the population of who is changing, so the number of students or the percentage of students. Again, please note that I'm looking at articulating it in such a way that I can measure it, and the number of students changes over time, the percentage of students changes over time. So the population, who are we looking at change? In terms of target, so at least 20% of students showing an increase in learning outcomes, so the target. We also need to point out timeline, so percentage of students who show at least 20% of or who show 20% increase, in test scores over one academic year. And we also should identify the threshold, as to saying that's when the at least comes in, where we say if at least 10% increases in learning scores for students over 1 year. Now let's look at it from the case study example. So if you remember, we said there should be improved student learning outcomes owing to attendance. Attendance will come about because of an interest in learning. This would come about because of an improvement in classroom infrastructure and teacher skills, and so on and so forth. So what we've done here, once we're looking at this case study, we've taken each outcome. So we've taken improved learning outcomes, and so each of these outcomes are listed here. We will be discussing SMART indicators and what you should look at when you are developing your indicators. But for now, let's just put the theory into practical application. So we're saying there should be an improved student learning outcomes, where we are saying there should be an average increase in test scores. For 10,000 students, we will, over every quarter, it's not the academic year, but it's over every quarter, we will see the test score increases. And in this case, we've said the target is for the population. It could also many times be a target for, it could also be the target for the kind of increase you need. But here we've taken threshold of a minimum average 25% increase. And we've also identified the means of verification. When are we going to look at this data? How are we going to look at this data? And this is going to be done through the quarterly tests. If again you look at the next outcome, which is improved student attendance, we say average percentage of monthly attendance for 10,000 students. We're going to be looking at it from monthly, every month on a monthly records, and we need to see a minimum 20% increase. Now, how thresholds help us is kind of really signal that the program is not effective enough in reaching these objectives. And later on, this data can also be used to kind of bring in some causality for how the program has impacted test scores or monthly attendance. We have then looked at increased student engagement through observations, where we are also looking at asking students asking questions in classes after 12 months of program initiation. And this is done by students providing positive perception scores. So you could do it through observation, or you could also have students to kind of, in the baseline say, do you regularly ask questions on a 5-scale Likert scale, and do you now ask questions? In terms of classroom activities, we are looking at the number of teaching methods used in class every quarter, and where the threshold we're putting in is at least 3 or 4 new methods used in classrooms. In terms of improved student interest in learning, again, we've relied on perception scores 12 months after. So basically, here we're doing a baseline endline on, how interested are you in a classroom, and then we're looking at it 12 months after. For improved digital infrastructure, we are looking at not only functional computers, but also computer to student ratios. Also the number of classes conducted with computers, looking every month at this data, where we want to see at least 20% increase in the ratio and functional computers, etc. In improved teacher skills, we are just doing a post-training test, if you look at the means of verification, to just look at the average increase in digital skills scores. So if you look at this indicator grid, what we're doing is we're taking each outcome and really trying to identify how we'll measure it, who we'll measure it with, how many are we going to measure, under what timeline, what is our sort of, when should there be a red flag as to we're not achieving certain outcomes or not achieving enough of a certain outcome, and how are we going to verify this. So we're going to look in the next video about, really deep diving into the concept of smart indicators. But I hope this grid gives you somewhat of a way or of a starting point to look at your developed theory of change, look at your key outcomes and how you're going to measure each of them, who you're going to measure it with what targets, timelines, thresholds, and your tools and means of verification. So there is a template attached with this module, so do try and fill it in.